Hello, Professor Anton. I really liked this video. I appreciate many of the points that you made. First, I want to talk about reductionism. Uh, I am someone that considers themselves a reductionist, but I think there's a big misunderstanding. I appreciate the kind of reduction that Richard Feynman talks about, where when you reduce a flower down into its parts, you don't lose the beauty. The beauty is still a part of the flower. Ontologically, you're breaking down these parts, and I believe you need to remember the relationships count as parts. Separate issue. But at any rate, once you break the flower down, you are adding to its ontology, that what's in the flower, what you think of as part of the flower, you are adding to the elements of the flower. You know, your knowledge of those elements. You know, you're not removing the beauty. Okay, now I just saw an interesting video at Stanford by a physicist talking about the breakdown of reductionism, and he was using string theory, but we can just think of it as you know, in terms of something more classical. It's not literally classical, but you know, something that is more familiar with just energy. You know, mass breaks down into smaller bits of mass. Eventually, you can break that into energy. And there's different kinds of energy. You know, there's the potential energy and photons and other force-carrying particles. And those force-carrying particles can all be sort of turned into each other. So at the very bottom, your reduction is not a reduction. You know, is energy made of parts? Because you can make one packet of energy can get absorbed and be broken into a bunch, or it can be recomposed. And it's a transformation is the point. So we lose reductionism at a certain point. We realize that all reduction was really transformation. But this is useful because that is what allows us to remember that by transforming into different sets of parts, from one set of parts into another, there's an analogy there for our physical deconstruction. Like often we talk about breaking down the flower, and we think literally about breaking down the flower, and that's where the beauty of a flower goes away, because you're chopping it up and doing chemicals in it. But when you talk about conceptually breaking down the flower and just knowing that it has the carbon in it and leaving it with the flower, you can understand that to transform that into something else does change it, right? So if you transform diamond into coal, you don't say they're the same thing really, and you also don't really say one reduces, you transform. And it's similar if you when you reduce the coal into its carbon, because it is the carbon and the arrangement. Like the beauty, the arrangement of the carbon in the coal or the diamond is a part of the reduction. It is something that should come up. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about is you talk about consciousness, and we always talk about it if it's in the head. And even if it is phenomenologically in the head, really our head is connected to the world around us. So the consciousness could be seen as a bigger thing. You know, as it's sort of the experience the universe is having where I am. You know, and it does involve the universe in that sense. But reductionism, the way I advocate it, doesn't have to miss that, because if you notice, you start to get to something that's merely semantic, which is if when you reduce the consciousness down to the brain, you find that the brain has all these connections and dependencies into the rest of the world, and so you're studying those connections, but you haven't missed its role. Sort of the pattern that it's a part of is a part of this reduction through these dangling ends that inspire you to ask the question, what are they attached to, what's the nature of the dependency, and also enable you to have a model in which those ends are then connected to the actual world that they're connected to, and the whole thing thus is a conscious phenomena centered but not constrained to the individual in some sense. So that's my feedback on reductionism and consciousness, and there you go.